Assessment in ICBE is divided into two complementary forms. We have the formative and then we have the summative. Under the formative assessment, there's a focus on learning during the process. This, of course, included diagnostic quizzes, class discussion, the peer-assisted learning interactions, and most importantly was the graded bi-weekly quizzes that gave some idea to the students as to how they were doing during the semester. The summative assessment was a different situation. It evaluates mastery at the end of the learning cycle. It includes, of course, major exams and projects that measure whether students can demonstrate the required competencies at a professional standard. What distinguishes the ICBE component here is that it integrates what I call the personalized adaptive retake test. Short for that is PART, P-A-R-T. Now, this system allows students multiple pathways to demonstrate mastery. The way that this works is that exams are scheduled over 3 consecutive weeks. Students have the choice to sit any one of those exams based on their readiness. Those who take the earlier exams are given a chance to retake specific questions in later rounds, with each retake featuring slightly more challenging version, and of course the score is reweighted down so that we can ensure fairness. As for students that are choosing the last date of the exam, they will not have an opportunity to retake anything, obviously. However, they will benefit from the extended preparation time. This additional time could be instrumental in enhancing their understanding and performance in the examination. Let me take this deeper to further explain this. So, students who have selected either the first or the second exam dates, they have an opportunity to retake questions which they achieved a score of 80% or less. So the cutoff point for me was 80%. So we're focusing on areas warranting further comprehension. So for students who opt for the first exam date, a 2-step retake mechanism is in place. How? Initially, they have the choice to retake the exam on the second date with slightly more challenging questions with a score reweighted out of 90%. Now, should those students still not maintain the 80% threshold, a subsequent retake is available on the third exam date. However, the questions this time will be more significantly tougher than the first exam date and slightly harder than the second exam date. And of course, the score now is reweighted further, and now it's reweighted out of 85. On the other hand, students who sit for the exam for the first time on the second date have the chance for a single retake on the third exam date. Similar to the first cohort, the questions in this retake will be higher in difficulty compared to the original ones, and they're reweighted out of 90%. And as I mentioned earlier, students who choose the third exam date, there is no retake option, but they have more time to prepare. So let me explain this even further with a practical example. So, usually the mid-semester exam is held in week 7, the final exam is held in week 16. So let's focus now, let's take the mid-semester exam as an example. So the first exam date was week 6, the second exam option was week 7, the third exam option was week 8. So students can do their first attempt in week 6, they can do a second attempt in week 7 and a third attempt in week 8. That's only if they started in week 6. As for students that begin in week 7, their first attempt will be there, and then their second and last attempt will be in week 8, and students that take the exam in week 8, there's no attempt, obviously, after that. So let's take this mid-semester scenario here. Let's assume that in week 6, I have a mid-semester exam which is made up of 5 different questions. Each question carries a different grade. So for example, question 1, 10 marks. Question 2, 25 marks. Question 3, 20 marks. Question 4, 25 marks. Question 5, 20 marks. So this is just an example. So obviously, this is out of 100. So let's just assume that on the first question, the student receives 9.3, second question 23.1, the third question 18, the fourth question 22, question 5 16.3. The student scored above 80% on each one of those questions. So there is no retake available because the student has, in my opinion, have achieved some form of mastery on each independent question. Let's take a look at another scenario. Let's assume that the student scored 7.4 out of 10 on the first question, 21.7 out of 25 on the second question, 14 out of 20 on the third question, 21.3 out of 25 on the fourth question, and then 13 out of 20 on the fifth question. So this gives us 77.5. Now, if we find the percentages, we can see clearly that the student did not master question 1, question 3, or question 5. So they are given the opportunity to resit those 3 questions in the next exam offering, which in this case will be week number 7. So let's assume in week number 7, the student comes, they sit those 3 different questions, are covering the same content as the original exam, but they're slightly harder. So let's assume that the student scored 9 out of 10 on the first question, 17 out of 20 on the third question, and then 18 out of 20 on the fifth question. So if we take a look at this, we see that they have achieved above 80% on each individual question. So in my opinion, they have been able to obtain the mastery component here. But then those scores will be reweighted out of 90%. So the first question will actually be 8.1, question 3 will be 15.3 marks, and then the fifth question will be 15.8. Now this is to ensure fairness. Now, the way that this is going to happen is that we're going to add the questions that were not retaken with the questions that were retaken in order to obtain the full mark, which in this case will be 82.3. So we can see that there's an improvement between week 6 and week 7. Now, of course, there's a challenge here, and the challenge is that we have to come up with 6 different versions of the exam, because there's going to be 3 first attempts, 2 possible second attempts, and then 1 possible third attempt. So those 6 different questions, 6 different exams have to be produced ahead of time. Now there's another issue that needs to be taken into account, which is the time allocation. So the way that I did this was I actually divided the possible score for each question out of the full 100. So for example, question 1, which carried 10 points or 10 marks, out of 100, that's going to give us 0.1. Then I multiply that by 90 minutes because the exam is going to be 90 minutes, an hour and a half. So the time allocated for the first question is 9 minutes. I follow the same reasoning, I follow the same method for the remaining questions, and that gives me 22.5 minutes for question 2, 18 minutes for question 3, 22.5 for question 4, and then 18 minutes for question 5. So if I go back to my scenario where the student repeats question 1, 3, and 5, that means they'll be given 9 minutes for question 1, 18 minutes for question 3, and then another 18 minutes for question 5. So that student will have only 45 minutes. So I can't give them the full 90 minutes because then they would have more time than everybody else. So that has to be done in order to ensure fairness. But then there's going to be a challenge because you have students that are sitting the exam, taking different retakes, and each one has a different time that they have to follow. So I came up with a system where I would display on the screen the names of the students, and I would let them know how many minutes they have remaining. So this is an example of my students that are actually sitting in the classroom where they have to check the clock, which is individualized for each one of them. The same thing applies to the final exam. There will be 3 different exam dates: week 12, week 14, and week 16. So I wanted to do something for the high achieving students. So I said to them, students that took the first mid-semester exam date, which was week 6, and were able to achieve above 80% on each individual question, but an A for the exam, and they were able to do the same thing for the final exam in week 12, which is the first exam offering. then that student will be given a certificate of mastery. And I explained to them what that meant. It's not just being a student who's on the dean's list or being a student who's an A student. It's above that. This is where you actually demonstrate that each single question, each single competency covered in the class has been mastered. So, this certificate will be given by the department head. And on top of that, the student is invited to come back as a teaching assistant for the remaining weeks in the semester. They still have to attend because that's part of the policy, but they don't have to attend as students. They would actually come with me to the classroom equipped with various things that they can do with the students to engage them in group settings.